London Property, home of Super Prime, where you can find informative, educational and entertaining content covering all aspects of property.
Hello and welcome to London Property, the home of Super Prime. I'm your host Farnaz and today we're in conversation with Fiona Docherty, who, when you're not doing magic tricks, looking after 10,000 units.
Correct, yes.
So welcome to the show. So Fiona, please, let's start by you telling our listeners the difference, the substantial difference between managing a building and managing individual units.
Well, managing an individual unit, you're only required to maybe repair the washing machine or liaise with the block agent if there's a communal issue. On a communal building, we're responsible for everything, all health and safety. Obviously, it's becoming far more complicated now with the new bills that are coming through, including the fire safety on the back of Grenfell and everything that comes with that. So now an agent has become much more than just your traditional block agent, but they have to be a jack of all trades and understand everything from cladding to engineering for comfort cooling and communal heating systems.
So these are all falling under health and safety. So if, you know, how thick can you go with health and safety when it comes to a building?
Health and safety is now the absolute, it's your Bible. It's probably as important, if not more important than the lease now, because you have to ensure that you're ticking those boxes, because if you're not, and God forbid anything goes wrong, you're the one that's going to be sitting in the dock for it. So
just as a brief summary, give us some headlines of what kind of things you need to be looking at when it comes to health and safety for buildings.
Obviously you have to have a health and safety audit done each year, as well as a fire risk assessment, depending on the number of units. So if it's below 25 units, it's once every 3 years. If it's 25 to 50, it's once every 2. And if it's over 50, it's once every year. However, if a block of 9 has got a communal boiler and a swimming pool, that would fall into the category of having it done once a year. And then from that, you have your risks of what's been flagged up, be it signage, be it that there's not a cosh cupboard for cleaners to put the chemicals in, fire stopping. Anything that comes up on that risk assessment is then graded, and you have a certain amount of time in which to have those fixed. And you have to make sure that that's all dealt with within that time period. Because in the event something goes wrong, as I say, if it hasn't been dealt with and it's been flagged, we're responsible.
So I'm imagining that checklist just keeps growing.
Correct.
As regulations go,
Correct.
You just keep adding to
Correct.
that checklist.
Yeah.
And when you're making a plan for a building, then you go to your checklist of things to do, and then you decide what times of year, what things need to happen. How does that process work?
It depends. If you're planning, if you're just doing your routine budget, then you include to have your health and safety audit and your fire risk assessment and what you already know is going to come up. Then on top of that, you have what's called a CapEx plan. So it's planning like cyclical major works, and those now have to include your M&E, whereas in a traditional block, it would just be the fabric of the building. There would be very little M&E other than the lift, and those lifts were built to last. So you'll have a lift in a block of 1930s that's probably been there for 60 years with very few issues, whereas in a new building, nothing's built to last, and there's far more issues.
So actually, that was going to be my next question, which is, you know, what are the major differences you see from a new development to the more old traditional buildings, and how you approach it and how they last and how they work?
Yeah, I mean, older traditional buildings, you know what you're dealing with. You're dealing with a fabric. What's going to go wrong? It might be that you have to do your cyclic decorations, your internal decorations, and you might have a board that, you know, is quite elderly because people have lived there forever. On a new building, a lot of new buildings, the leases last longer than the actual fabric of the building. So you might have only an 80-year guarantee on the fabric of your building, but your actual lease that's been granted is 125 years. Plus you have much more complicated services such as communal heating, CHPs, and communal comfort cooling, all of which carry all sorts of different risks. If you haven't got breaks in your comfort cooling and one person doesn't service their air conditioning, then that affects the quality of the overall system as a whole, and then can result in that system failing over time.
And are you seeing that as more modern buildings are built, that, you know, all the systems are becoming internal to the flats rather than communal?
No, the opposite.
The opposite's happening.
Yeah.
And is there a bigger percentage of expenditure now with all these demands on landlords from health and safety and from technology?
Without a doubt. I mean, without a doubt. I mean, you're looking at, if, you know, traditionally you'd probably be about, I don't know, £5-6 a square foot. If you had 24-hour concierge in a mansion block plus your reserve. On a new build, you could be looking at anything between £9 and £13 to £14 a square foot, depending on the services and also the number of units. I mean, we've got buildings where we've only got very few units, but they've got 24-hour concierge, they've got a building manager, swimming pool, spa. Those are coming in at nearer £25 to £30 a square foot.
What are some of the really pressing issues that landlords are facing in the older buildings that they have to do versus new builds?
In the older buildings, it's probably making it more energy efficient, because those buildings aren't, you know, built for energy. You don't have LED lighting, stuff like that. So you have to bring in processes like that to try and make those more energy efficient, and also try and reduce your common parts where you've got, you know, drafty common parts and big ceilings where the heat's just going straight through the ceiling and nowhere else. You know, new buildings are far more cost effective when it comes to heat retention. If you go into a new building, you'll normally feel that there's heat in the common parts. If you go into an older building, you'll normally see a number of radiators which need to be switched on to keep the heat in the common parts.
So do you feel that the efficiency, together with all the new technological abilities of a new building, balance out so that both cost percentage-wise more or less the same to run, or it's still more expensive to run a modern building?
I think it's still more expensive, because with modern buildings you have far more technology. Unfortunately, technology is constantly moving, so what might have been a state-of-the-art system that was put in 3 years ago is now no longer a state-of-the-art. Or it could have been that something that had to tick the environmental box, so you had to put a geothermal plant in. Well, you were used as that guinea pig. That geothermal's now failed, and you haven't got a system to compare against. So you're suddenly faced with a massive expense of having to replace that system.
And presumably your tradespeople have to be specialists,
Completely.
whereas you can't have a general person like you did in the olden days. So
correct.
you've got a lot more people that you need to tap into.
100%. I mean, in the olden days, you could get your porters, as they called them then, rather than concierge. They'd go up a ladder, they'd change a light bulb. You can't do that now, because health and safety dictates they have to be ladder trained. They can say it's not within their duties because they're scared of heights, you know. So again, you're paying a lot more for a company to come in and change a light bulb than the old days, where you could actually get one of the site staff to do it.
And if you had to say, so the little that I know about building management is that the actual cost of signing up to an agency is quite minimal per unit. And a lot of the income comes from having to manage works. And
I think, I mean, it's changed. It's horses for courses now. You know, if you want quality, I think people realise they have to pay a little bit more. You know, we've had an example recently where we took on a block, and it was so labour intensive that when I actually sat down and worked out how much we were actually paying them to manage the block. So we had a meeting with the people and we set out, you know, what we were doing, and we've had to double the management fee. And I think people do realise, of course you're still going to get the other side of the coin where everyone thinks you can do something for nothing. But it's whether or not you want the boxes ticked, and you to know as a resident, and also maybe as a director of a manco, that you can sleep easy at night because everything is compliant. Or you go the other way and go cheap, and, you know, it's that old story, isn't it? Pay peanuts, get monkeys.
it is very much compliant driven, isn't it? All of it. So what I was curious about is that a lot of times, you know, in the smaller buildings where people are very sensitive to the cash flow and they're not necessarily institutional investors or what have you, people are very sensitive and they pay an amount per unit to have the properties managed, but then they kind of are always on the defense when you say you've got to spend this money and you've got to spend that money, because they feel that the managing agent is being motivated to actually encourage works.
Yeah.
And is there a way that you give comfort to your clients to try and, demonstrate that actually our interests are aligned. We're here to help you. We're not here to generate work just to earn a fee.
You have to be transparent, but they also have to understand that if we tell them that they have to do something because it's a compliance issue, it's not down to our discretion as to whether or not it gets done. If you don't do it and we've said to you that you've got to do it, then unfortunately if something goes wrong, we can actually show an audit trail and that person will be then held liable.
So what would be your best advice to our listeners right now who are listening to you from both a leaseholder tenant's perspective and a freeholder's perspective? So if you're speaking to a leaseholder, what would be your best advice as to how they should engage with the management of their building and respond or feedback or...
Communication is key. If you get that communication going, then everything should be aligned. It's understanding. What we find is if we give people a proper explanation as to why we have to do something, and that's backed up with, evidence, then people say, well, I understand now. I mean, we've got a case now where we're having to raise a substantial amount of money on an older building, but it hasn't been touched for like 30 years, and it's now dilapidated. And straight away, we've had a resident come back and said, in 2000 and X, we went to the FTT. Well, that was 10 years ago. It's a completely different scenario now. You've got windows that aren't compliant. You open those windows, a child can fall out. There's all those sorts of things that need to be done. Call a meeting, explain to them, go through what we've got and why we need to do it when we need to do it. But also, by doing it, their values will, once the work's done, their values will double overnight, because their values are probably 2/3 of where it should be in that area because of the state of the building.
So they really need to understand that the more you look after your asset, the more you're going to maintain
Correct.
or enhance the value.
It's like your car. You wouldn't drive your car and not service it, would you? So why do you think it's okay not to do that to a building?
And what about landlords? What resistance do you get from landlords, and what would be your best advice to landlords?
Most landlords, unless they have an underlying issue, i.e. they might have apartments in the building, which is why they're driving to keep the service charges low, most landlords want their buildings maintained properly, because at some point they'll either try and sell the building or the residents will try and enfranchise, and if it's a well-run building, they'll keep their values.
And before we say thank you, goodbye, and let you get on with your very busy day, if somebody, one of our listeners is listening to you and they wanted to explore what you could do for them, how do you differentiate yourself from other residential managers?
It's quite difficult. Management is very much about personalities, and we take a view that buildings, like people, have personalities, and it's not one size fits all. So we don't go in, well, that building's there and it's in that area, so that should be priced at that. And it's also, for us, it's understanding what the client wants and also matching someone within our organisation to the client's requirements and the client's personality. And by doing that, that tends to build up relationships, and you can see people working together and getting things done.
Well, thank you very much for giving us this time.
Thank you.
And I know you need to run off, so we will put you on our experts directory, and any one of our listeners who need any help with their building management will be in touch with you directly to get some help.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening, and thank you to Fiona for giving us an insight into the crazy world of property management. To find experts like Fiona and get assistance for any of your real estate problems, please head over to our experts directory, where you can find a professional hand-picked for you that you can engage with directly and ask your questions and get help.
Thanks for listening to the London Property Podcast. Head over to londonproperty.co.uk and subscribe to our newsletter to receive latest updates.